what your reports will look like when you score your WISC and your WACE. So you'll see what they look like. I'm going to show you also what information you're going to get from those reports. And you're going to feel very anxious because it's a lot. But for today, all you need to understand is the logistics of a report, what goes into it. That's it. That's it.
Okay, good.
Over the next week or so, because next week we don't have class, so next week, really hone in on reading the chapter 4. And remember one conference?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
next week.
I got you, best.
So you're like,
I was confused about that.
Yeah,
That's just the
Slip
indication
my
of
mind.
like.
so no week, yeah.
Okay.
So next week, read the chapter, start kind of prepping your mind for chapters 5, 6, and 7, because we're gonna hone in on statistics. So if you don't like stats and numbers, start reading, because we're gonna hit that hard when we get back the week after next. And then after that week, we start administration of the WACE. So it's fast and furious. So enjoy the week next week, and then kind of get your mind wrapped for the hell that's coming after that. Alright, cool. That being said, welcome. Alright, so let's talk about reports. So, I've been doing this a long time, and I'm going to tell you these reports that I've seen are awful from other clinicians. As time has gone on, I think we've kind of forgotten the purpose of reports. I think we're just kind of like throwing things together, and then we're just giving people diagnoses without any kind of explanation. So I'm going to tell you the purpose of your reports, and then what you're going to be doing going forward. Regardless of what kind of role you choose to do, counseling, assessments, combination, any kind of reports you're writing need to be a similar format. And so, for any purpose of report, think of it as your deliverable. So, this is your end product. What I sometimes will see is these really crappy reports, and families are like, oh, this is what I get? This is it? Like, this really crappy report is what I paid money for? And what I tell families is, if you're paying money, or whoever's paying for this evaluation, your deliverable needs to be consistently formatted, professional, and in a way, showing them that what they paid for is worth it. And so if your formatting is off, or if you copy and paste it and then change the format or font, it's very obvious. And so making sure that you edit it, you review it, you read it again, and provide good recommendations is ultimately what you're doing to kind of tell them this is what you get out of this. So it is an end product. For the most part, reports are used for various different things. So either you're answering a question about a referral, you're giving an update on the notes that you're writing about the counseling session, you're giving a reevaluation to give them updated diagnoses. Whatever it is, your reports are used for various different things. Ultimately, it's your product. So whatever you give them, it's a reflection of you. So if your report is sloppy, inconsistently formatted, you don't have any recommendations, it tells a lot about you. So it makes you look bad if you don't have a good report. Because Oklahoma is so small, we do talk. And so when someone, a clinician, reviews your reports and they notice that it's bad, they'll start telling other people not to refer to you. And so, and this world is very small. So if you mess up, or if you are consistently doing bad practices, people are going to talk about it. So keep that in mind. Okay. So with this report writing, the first thing you're going to do is gather information. So all of you are pretty good at interviewing or have been taught to interview, right? And so when you're interviewing people, I'm going to show you 3 different ways to do it, but essentially your job is to gather information about everything. So I'm going to ask you to get very, very detailed information, get very, very intrusive information, and then ask them about details about their life that sometimes people keep that secret. So your job is to gather information. You're like a little detective trying to figure out as much as you can in that 1 hour, hour and a half session. So 2 different definitions, breadth and depth. For breadth, it's looking at the purpose of report. So think of this like throwing a net into the ocean. So what's gonna stick? What am I gonna find out there? Just asking a general question, what am I gonna get out of this? And then depth is figuring out, honing in on those questions. As an example, if I asked you, tell me about your childhood, and you said, well, I was a victim of sexual assault. Well, now I can follow up and ask more questions, right? Tell me more about that. What happened? How did you feel? So I'm able to hone in on that instance or that situation. So your job is to ask a lot of questions. With the interviews, you have 3 different main types. We have structured, we have unstructured, and we have semi-structured. Each one of them has their own advantages and disadvantages. Each one has their own tone, their own kind of formatting. And of course, each one has its own kind of non-verbal language you're using during the interviews. And so the purpose of these, again, is to gather more information and be able to allow the client to see how you work with them. So are we a good fit? Is this gonna work out? Are they gonna open up to you? Are you making them feel comfortable? So let's talk about structured interviews. So structured is what it sounds like. It's very structured. So you have a list of questions. I'm gonna ask each one. We're gonna go down the row, and that's all we're doing, right? There's 20 questions. I'm gonna ask every single one of them, and then we're gonna go from there. So a structured interview covers a lot of topics because you're asking a lot of questions. And it does increase reliability because if you have a pre-prescribed items that you're gonna ask every client you see. So a lot of people like structured interviews because it's the same questions they ask every client. So it's pretty standardized across the board. This does allow you to gather as much information as possible because you're covering a list of questions and you're ensuring you're not missing anything because you have kind of these talking points to kind of follow up on. So they kind of work as like a guide and a flow chart almost to kind of guide you as you ask more questions, but it is very structured. Number 1 is this question. Number 2 is this question. Number 3 is this question. You just kind of go down a row until you hit all your questions. Very structured. So those are some benefits. Of course, there are some drawbacks. That being, sometimes, because they are predetermined, you really can't go off into a rabbit hole. You really can't, go off the track because you have a pre-described item list. And so if you want to follow up more on a different kind of scenario or follow up on something they said previously, you don't really have that luxury because you have all these questions to ask. But sometimes being very formal, they don't really allow you to kind of go on a hunch and ask for questions. You kind of have to stick to the script. The other disadvantages of this interview is that it does feel like a little bit dehumanizing because you're kind of like, thank you for telling me that. Number 2. Oh, thank you for that. Number 3. And so people kind of feel like, ooh, like, is this how it's gonna go? You're just gonna go one by one, and that's it. And that's kind of how it works. And so if there's disclosing abuse and neglect, and they tell you about that, and you said, all right, thank you for telling me that you got abused. Number 3, tell me about, and so you're kind of like where's the stopping point? How do you kind of ease in? And so it does feel a little dehumanizing. Minorities do misinterpret these items sometimes, where you just kind of go hone in one by one, and you don't really provide any kind of clarification because again, it's standardized. And so a lot of times you don't have the ability to kind of reword or rephrase something because you're trying to stick to the script. And so that is a drawback. It's very formal, doesn't really allow you to go back and forth, doesn't really allow them to give you more details or for you to kind of follow, the flow of the conversation. That's negative. On top of that, it does kind of allow you as an examiner to follow up a little bit to alleviate any kind of confusion, but it's not as often common because you do have a lot of questions to ask. So sometimes people feel like they can't go back and rephrase or clarify because they only have an hour, or they have an hour and a half to complete all the questions. So it's kind of a little stressful when you're like, I want to ask more about that, but I only have 30 minutes left. I'm just going to have to go power through. It doesn't always allow for depth as well because again, you're just gathering as much information as possible and not really going into the details of the nitty gritty because again, you have a run of questions. So structured is just, it's a good tool. It just is a lot of negatives to it. So in our roles, this doesn't really work very well. In counseling and school psych, you don't really use this as often because you kind of go off of the hunch. You go off of the flow of the conversation, the tone of the mood. And so this isn't really a good strategy to use or the only strategy to use because you need to go with the flow sometimes. So then we have unstructured. So unstructured is what it sounds like. This is like the cozy corner. We're gonna talk, we're gonna chit chat, we're gonna go with the flow. There's not really any agenda and we're just gonna talk. So unstructured allows the client to feel very much like they're directing the interview. Like they're the ones directing the direction of the interview. They're providing the guidance. They're discussing what they want to discuss, and you're just going along with it. It does allow you to get a lot of depth information because it does allow you to cover very sensitive information because they're just talking. They're just kind of giving you all this information while you're kind of guiding them. And so sometimes people feel more comfortable and they start kind of telling you more details or more sensitive information because they're just talking. So it does allow for that deepness. Now, that being said, there are some disadvantages. One, sometimes you don't feel like you can catch up because there's so much going on. You're like, where do we stop? At what point do I stop you so we can cover other topics? So it's hard to kind of stop a client in the middle of them talking because you don't want to interrupt them. You don't want to come across as rude or insensitive, but you also need to have a stopping point because you're like, when do we hit the other questions? When do we kind of go somewhere else with the conversation? But sometimes you may spend a lot of time on things that you don't find important. They may start talking about the grocery store. And they're like, one time I saw this old lady and she cooked me some chicken and you're like, oh God, we're gonna be here for hours. Can you please stop? And you can't say that, right? You can't be like, can you stop talking? Because then they're gonna be like, peace out. And so it's hard to kind of know how do I stop the conversation and how do I transition to a different topic without interrupting or making you not feel heard or valid. And so sometimes you spend a lot of time on things that are not super important. So that's unstructured. So kind of combining both or making it more of a realistic approach is semi-structured. So essentially we combine both. So I like this approach because I kind of have some questions, so 5 or 6 questions, but then I have enough time to go with the flow. So depending on how we're talking, I'll follow up and I'll ask more questions and I'll kind of go with the flow. So semi-structure allows me to do both. This is really the preferred way outside in the real world because we don't really have the luxury of having 4 hours to interview. Sometimes it's only an hour, sometimes it's only 45 minutes, sometimes it's 30 minutes. And so this allows you to get as much detail as possible using some questions, but also allowing you to ask more questions and kind of rephrase certain things. So semi-structure is probably the best way to go. Of course, taking into account that there's also disadvantages of that as well because you have limited questions, not enough time, but ultimately combines both approaches. I like combining it. You may find your own kind of way, but mostly combine it.
I like what the book said about unstructured interviews, meaning that like sometimes clients will just hold things from you and they'll be really secretive. And if you don't have specific questions to ask them about specific things, they just won't tell you about their alcoholism or their family history or what they're doing or X, Y, and Z. I thought that was pretty neat. And then the person ended up transitioning to semi-structured because of that after the years of experience in the field. They're like, well, people just start telling me things, so I have to have some kind of structure.
Yeah, it has to be some, because as people, sometimes we don't know what you want to know, or we don't want to tell you unless you ask us specifically.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, you need some direction, but not so structured that you're like, next question, all right, this is a lot. So semi-structure does have a lot of good advantages. You'll find your own way, but most clinicians do this kind of approach because it's a combination of both. So, that being said, let's go down. So in your in your reports, when you go over the background information, essentially, I'll show you where to put this information. But some questions to ask your clients. Because what you're doing is people that you know, you really don't have the luxury to get a whole lot of details because you know these people that you're assessing, but you can ask them questions that they're comfortable asking or telling you about without getting into any kind of weird territory. As an example, your mom or dad, you don't really want to ask them about their sexual history. I think, right? You don't want to know that. Or previous drug or alcohol use. You also don't want to know that, right? You're kind of like, you know, there's something that I don't want to know that. So for your class assignment, pick questions out of this list, and this is uploaded in D2L, that you're comfortable with. So tell me about, you know, what you do on a daily basis. What causes you anxiety? Tell me about your upbringing and how was it like growing up with so-and-so, you know? Or do you feel like you have any problems, you know, staying organized or being overwhelmed by a certain task? How's it going at work? So just very minimal questions for this assignment. Of course, not in the real world, you're asking a lot of intrusive questions, but because you're assessing familiar people, pick and choose ones you feel are appropriate for your client. So some examples are listed here. So there's several subsections. So in D2L, and this is from the WASTE book, little tiny red, white book, we have background information questions you can choose from. We also have presenting problems and health history questions you can ask them. And there's also familial factors, cognitive, work history, and so forth. So pick and choose ones you feel like are appropriate for your client, and then document those in your reports. Cool? All right. So that being said, as far as your interviewing skills go, it's up to you how you want to approach your current clients. My suggestion is to find out which ones you like better. If you want to look at the questions and just have 10 and cover each one, then you're doing structured. If you're doing 5 of the questions and then allowing time to kind of follow up, you're doing unstructured or semi-structured. If you have no questions, unstructured. So depending on how you're going to approach your clients, document that in your report. So you would say, for example, Johnny came in for an interview, the examiner chose to interview using an unstructured method, or a structured method, or a semi-structured method. Just so that your people know, people outside of this room, what kind of interview you use for that assessment. So documenting that is appropriate for billing insurance purposes, clinicians that use it for medication purposes, doctors, they want to know how you approach the interview. All right. So as we have gone through COVID and kind of went through that era, COVID caused us to do more electronic assessment type things. One of the nice things about COVID is that because of COVID, we were able to generate reports that were more comprehensive. So previously, reports that were generated from our software was very minimal. Like it was some scores and a graph, and that was it. And then we had to create our own kind of wording. Now there's thousands of templates. So out in the real world, you're never going to create your own kind of report. You're going to use templates. That's just realistically. Most clinics, schools have templates. You use those shells to kind of outline the report, and you fill in the details using your own client information, and then making it more individualized. But for the most part, you all will have access to shells. So these reports have certain formatting you'll follow, graphs that you will kind of insert, and you just kind of follow the flow of the templates. So in a way, it makes your job a little bit easier because you're not creating from scratch. Nobody does. Not realistic. But that being said, because of COVID, these reports are now more comprehensive. And so what's been happening lately is people like it so much that they're just copying and pasting into these templates. And so they will generate the reports from the WISC software, copy and paste it into their own report template, and then sign off. And that's the report. Again, as a client, if I'm seeing this as your deliverable, I'm questioning like, what input did you put into this? Where's your expertise? Where's your recommendations? This is the computer program, and that's all you gave me. Because we are using this, there's a lot of clinicians out there just copying and pasting. So don't do that. Don't just copy and paste and then sign your name on it and call it good. That's not a good use of your degree or your skills. Anyone can copy and paste. So don't do that. What I do want you to do is when you generate these reports and it gives you beautiful information, choose the information that's understandable to you, that you get, and you can present it in a way that's understandable to your client, and then add more details based on what you interacted with. And so you can use that information to kind of supplement what you're going to be using and adding information on. You're not going to supplant. You're not replacing your expertise. And so use it to kind of put the meat and potatoes into your report, but then add a little twist to it, add recommendations, add a little bit of razzle dazzle, right? You don't want to just copy paste it and call it good. So they are good resources, just don't copy and paste everything. It is very obvious when you're just copying and pasting. Alright, so based on that, you are responsible for whatever instruments you choose that they are appropriate for your clients. Again, as we spoke about previously, depending on what kind of clients you have and where you work, a lot of times those clinics and schools will say, this is all we have, sorry about you. If you know that this test is not good for that client, you should say something. And you should say like, hey, not okay. Who can we call and get something else? Or can we order this test? If you don't advocate for your clients, they have no idea what kind of test they'll be given and or if it's a fair test. For them, they're relying on you to be honest and ethical. And so if you know in the back of your head it's not a good test and you still administer it, legally you're fine, you're not illegally doing anything, but ethically you're a little shady. And so really question it and make sure the clinics value diversity and know that there's more than just one tool out there. There's hundreds you can choose from. That's not just the WISC or the Stanford Medicine Life. There's a multitude of tests. I say that because your licensures, APA, ACA, they care what you're doing out there. They are the more ethical police, right? So if a client complains to these boards and they're like, hey, by the way, this clinician used this test on my child and classified them as having this disorder, and they didn't take into account that they were selectively mute. I'm questioning their ethics. The board would review that and say, why did you do that? Why did you give this test to this client? And if your response is, that's all I got, or they made me, that is on you. It is not on your clinic, it's not on your entity, it's you. You're the clinician choosing the instrument, it's on you. So be careful and advocate for your clients and for yourself. All right. Again, you have codes. Whatever you administer, whatever you interpret, that's on you. So if you misinterpret something, or you administer something you know it's wrong, or you don't have enough practice in the tool, and you start winging things just because you're out of time or you don't have a lot of support, that's on your own ethical code, and that can cause you your license. So if a clinic or school is saying, administer this test, and you're saying, I'm not comfortable, I don't know it, give me some time to review the manual and start practicing, that's okay. But if you said, okay, I'll just wing it, not okay. And so really making sure that you understand that whatever you choose to do, make sure you can administer it, you can interpret it, and you understand the purpose of the assessment. I don't want people calling you a test monkey. So a test monkey in our world is someone who just picks up a test and just start administering just random crazy crap. That's a test monkey. Typically test monkeys graduate from online colleges. So like, Capella. Those people are test monkeys. We'll just administer a test at them right, no regards to how it's done, they don't care if it's done correctly, they're just winging it. They don't care. You can't do that. Please don't do that. That's on you. So I don't want you losing license. If you're not comfortable, again, speak up. Alright. Back to reports. So, that being said, your reports are very comprehensive. So in this class, because we're only doing one kind of test each time, your reports are going to be pretty short and sweet. So maybe 5-6 pages at the most for these reports each. But out in the real world, when you're actually doing a whole bag of assessments, you're looking at 20, 25 pages, maybe 30 pages. And that's like a good report. Now, if you're a shitty clinician, your reports are 3 pages long, and you're not going to do that. Don't be a crappy clinician. Nobody can write a comprehensive report in 3 pages unless you're copying and pasting from programs. So when you write these reports, you have to be thorough. You gotta be comprehensive, you gotta be professional. Ultimately, your reports are because they're being accessed by these government entities. So whoever is getting this report have protections under FERPA, school psychs, or HIPAA, counselors. Essentially, if anyone requests records and they pull this record, that becomes a record in court, in law, or legal civil case, or it goes to the Office of Civil Rights. And so if this report is pulled and it's inspected, if it's not a very good report, you're gonna get chewed on, and you're gonna get into a lot of trouble. And so try and be as comprehensive as possible and legally defensible.
So these reports are our chance to not only look at the results they're getting, but also to justify them by connecting them with background information, saying client was deficient in this area, likely due to X thing happening at this developmental period.
Yes. Yep. You're connecting everything together. Yep. In a very long report.
So this is sort of the chance to filter out, like, the test may show that they have a low IQ, but it's like, oh, they're just unfamiliar with this information.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a direction.
Just get that, don't necessarily slap a diagnosis, give them a tutor
Right.
instead.
Just because.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, some suggestions for report writings. Again, when you're writing a report, it's important to be very professional. As an example, on Monday, I was given a report from a family, and I read it, and one of the statements was, Mama is in prison, Dada is in jail. Is that professional? No. And then another report said, child is awful, needs discipline. Is that professional? No.
That gives you no information
It
whatsoever.
doesn't matter. No. And these families are like, there you go. And I'm like, this is terrible. How do you word that? Well, you can say father was incarcerated, or the child was reluctant and did not feel comfortable during the test session, or the child was not familiar with the session and refused to comply with directions. There's different ways to word it. That's not child is awful, mama, prison, dad, jail. Not okay. Another thing is use professional words. Don't use acronyms. Don't put things like child came in well groomed, aka they're looking fired. No, don't do that. Or mama came on time, rolling in a G-Wagon. Again, not appropriate. I say these are things I run reports.
Are you serious?
Yes.
These-
So
okay, come on.
don't do that. Essentially, if you're writing a report, be very professional, easy to read, easy to interpret.
Is half of our job just going to be a perpetual string of reading other people's work and going,
Yes.
oh my god, how did you get
It's
licensed?
awful. You'll see some of these and be like, what the hell were you doing? These are terrible.
And this person gets paid more than me?
Yeah. Don't try and dazzle them. I say that because I don't want your reports to have like pretty colors and rainbow stickers on the side and like star formats and blue ink. No. Like professional, it's standardized formatting, like APA, like Times New Roman, black font, simple.
So just stick to APA formatting.
I mean, yes.
Okay.
Yes. The ones I've seen are awful. Like I've seen people who have like stars on the side, like a little rainbow. I'm like, why?
What about all my scented colored pencils I
No,
just bought?
I can't use those.
Please tell me you haven't seen a handwritten one in the past like 3 years.
Not the past 3 years, no.
Okay, good.
Past 10 years, yes.
Okay, that's at least a little more
A little
understandable.
better, yeah.
Was the handwriting good at least?
No, it's
God.
atrocious. Yeah.
God.
And then labeling, again, if you do not have enough evidence to give them a label, don't. It's that simple. And if you don't have enough to say they have a diagnosis of disability, don't give them one. It's really that simple. Only give them a label when it's necessary and you have evidence to support it. Don't be afraid to take a stand. So, I hate saying this, but last week we had a clinician who diagnosed a child with autism. They gave us a report and we reviewed it, and they based it solely on rating skills, which not good practice, right? When we called the clinician and the family was with us, and the family was like not in agreement with the label, and they said, we don't agree with this, is there something else you can administer to make sure it's autism? Immediately clinician said, maybe it's not. Maybe I did it wrong. Maybe they have ADHD instead. Like in a click of a hat. If you truly feel it's autism, then you say it's autism. And it's not like a quick like, maybe it's not autism. I know I charge you all that money and I billed your insurance for it, but like, maybe you're right. Maybe it's not that. Just because we had a 1-minute conversation. So if you truly feel someone has something, or meet a diagnosis of some sorts, stick to it. And don't just like go with the flow and change your mind because you don't want to feel like intimidated or have any kind of conflict. Again, it's your license. So if you're saying something, it's something. You're just back on your word because you feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Not good.
Those two are also vastly different as far
Significantly.
as everything
Yes.
about it.
They can have
Overlapping,
symptoms,
yes.
certain
For sure.
overlapping symptoms,
But they
yes.
ruled out
For
ADHD
sure.
and then ruled in autism on paper.
Mhm.
And then flip-flopped it.
It's just because of they
It's because they felt comfortable.
they hit like a second of pushback
Yes.
and they're like, oh.
Yes.
I would get it if it was close though. Like if
If it
there
was
is,
close,
if there
yeah.
actually is some ambiguity
Yeah.
in the diagnosis, then I
Okay.
could maybe understand considering it.
Right,
but
yes,
flip-flopping,
100%, yeah. Flip-flopping, no. No. No.
Like maybe a more appropriate response would have been to, we could maybe do another assessment
Yeah,
just to check.
more push to make sure, yes.
That's what I thought. That's how I thought that story was gonna
No.
end. They're like, oh yeah.
That's what I thought too. When I called, I was like, he's gonna be very reasonable. No, it was very quick. Like, maybe I was wrong. Not good. Minimize complicated language. Make it reasonable, easy to read. What they legally tell us is a 3rd grade level. So when you're writing your reports, make it understandable for your clients because they're the ones gonna take it home with them. They're gonna read it and produce it to other people. And so if they don't understand it, it means nothing to them. So breaking it down in simple terms is a way to go. Of course, using a professional wording as well. Don't just make it like Dr. Seuss book and you're like very, very simple, but 3rd grade level, like enough so people can flow with it and read it and comprehend it. Sort of what you're talking about. Reduce acronyms. Just don't use acronyms in general. Like, it's just not good form. If you're constantly saying ADHD, but you're not spelling out ADHD the first time, like APA formatting. You define it first, and then you can use subsequent acronyms. That's okay. But seeing like saying things like the child has GAD, ODD, CD, ADHD, and ID. Okay, I know what those are, but parents are like, what are these letters? What does it stand for? I have no idea. Are these just random letters you put together? I don't know.
Like that kind of short form language is better for, I'd say, correspondence with
Exactly. Which
other
you
professionals.
clinicians.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Spell it out. I know it's longer, but again, it's your end product. It's going with them, so they should be able to understand what you're writing.
At the end of the day, you're also getting paid for the time.
You're getting paid for it. Yes. Yes. All right. So every format of a report is a little bit different, but the majority have the exact same sections. So most reports include demographic information. They also include presenting problem or the reason for the whole purpose of the evaluation, familial background, educational background, and then again, substance use and abuse. So in regards to the formatting for your report, I'll show you in a little bit which subsection and headers I want you to use. But in general, you'll see the exact same thing in every report possible. They all kind of follow a very similar format. A lot of times people will have vocational history as well, a mental status exam, which I'll show you. Then they have their assessment results, then the diagnoses, following the summary, and then recommendations. So every report kind of follows the same flow for the most part. So your reports will look very similar to most people's reports in general. So what is demographic? Well, what it sounds like. Your name, date of birth, gender, the date of an interview or date of testing. It's your basic demographic information. That goes first. Then comes the presenting problem, counselors. Reason for referral, school psychs. Two different wording, same thing. Counselors like the term presenting problem. Schools like the term reason for referral. The same thing. Essentially, why are you here? What am I addressing? What are your concerns? And so this allows you to explain why they have come in for counseling or an evaluation. Why are they here?
So this isn't just applicable to IQ assessments. This is
I
every
agree.
assessment.
Yes.
This is all.
All assessments, yep.
Okay.
In general.
There wouldn't be like any real reason why you get in trouble if, let's say, a counselor uses reason for.
No, it's your preference. Yeah. Some people just like one or the other. It's all the same.
It's just preference.
Yeah. Then comes family background. So pretty self-explanatory. So any kind of factors related to your upbringing that may be a factor in your own mental health. So maybe how you grew up, any siblings you have, their ages, their sex, you know, whether you have intact family, divorced family, adopted, fostered, whatever it is, that's gonna be documented. And then we'll ask you about, you know, are you married, engaged, in a relationship, any stories from your childhood you want to share, so trauma, neglect, abuse, things you saw. And then of course, any kind of information regarding your caretakers. How were you raised? How's your relationship with your parents? Do you sort of talk to them? Why not? All this is gathered during the interview process. So really, the first part of your evaluation is a big chunk of it is an interview. I'm just gonna talk to you and ask a lot of questions. These questions are mainly for children because usually families will tell you this information. So the parents usually are coming into the clinic, they're coming into the school, wanting an evaluation for their child, and they'll tell you pretty much what you need to know regarding their own children, if they're honest and not crazy and not on drugs. Okay, pretty much.
I'm guessing from that it's generally a better idea just to ask the kid. In addition to that.
In addition, yes. Yeah. Kind of asking the kid like, is it true you like, you know, mom and dad live together? And they'll be like, no.
They'll tell
They
you like
don't
that.
live together. Yeah. Mama has a boyfriend. Yeah, they'll tell you all kinds of things. Yeah. For adults,
Yes,
yeah.
they do.
They do. Adults, you want to include the marital status. You want to include any kind of marital issues, their age and sex of children, and any kind of significant others they want to share about. Again, in relation to the presenting problem. Then comes the significant medical and counseling history. So you want to ask them, have you had counseling before? Have you ever been to therapy? Have you ever gone to see medical attention for anything? Any kind of medical attention. As an example, try to commit suicide, attempted to threaten somebody, threaten yourself, hurt others, anything like that? No? Okay. So you ask questions regarding that. And then any history of just any kind of psychological issues previously. And then again, reporting any substance use and or abuse. That could be marijuana, it could also be things like cocaine, pills, alcohol, things like that are all considered to be substance use and abuse.
In situations like this, would it be important to assure the client that we don't break confidentiality if they tell us they have taken illegal substances?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So at the beginning of your session, you always tell them like, here's why I break confidentiality, here's why I don't. So they know what they can divulge and tell you. Alright. Then move into educational history. So again, what's your education look like? If you go to school, college, high school, middle school, career tech, whatever it is. Any kind of background information regarding your job that you have now. Did you want to do this job? Why or why not? Did you study this career? Why or why not? Why or why not? And then anything else regarding their issues. So legal issues, you know, have you ever been incarcerated, got a misdemeanor, things like that. Sexuality, again, ask questions about that. And then any kind of financial problems, like are you stressed about going bankrupt, stressed about paying your daily bills? Again, is it related to your presenting problem? As an example, if a family comes in with a child and they're looking for an ADHD evaluation, do I need to ask them about sexuality? Probably not. Or financial problems? Probably not. It's not related to my presenting problem. If they're coming in for an anxiety assessment or PTSD, I may want to ask more questions regarding that, right? Whatever the referral question is, you ask questions related to that referral question. So if they're coming in for an evaluation and you're discovering more issues, then of course follow up and ask more questions. But if it's like a true black and white ADHD evaluation, autism, anxiety, tailor your questions to your referral or presenting problem. Okay. So, CalSTARS and school psychs, you're all going to be administering a mental status exam at some point. A mental status exam is just a very quick 1 to 2 paragraphs on your mental state at the moment of the evaluation. So the day that I meet you, I'm gauging who you are in a very quick introduction. And so I'm documenting how you look. So well-groomed, cleaned, on time. I'm documenting if you came in willingly or if I had to drag you in. I'm documenting if you had good posture, meaning you didn't come in like all kind of bumped and like kicking the ground. I'm gonna document that. Or if you're hiding under a table, I'm documenting that as well. So all your body language, your eye contact, your way of speaking, that's your mental states. So that gives you information as to whether or not we're gonna do well in this evaluation or we're gonna have some issues. You usually can tell when a child comes in if it's gonna be a good test session or an awful test session. If they're coming in throwing things and screaming and crying, it's gonna be a hard day. But they're coming in pretty quiet and reserved, you can get them to kind of work with you. A lot of times children like working with strangers, for the most part, when parents are not in the room. So here's a question. If a parent insists on being in the room while you're testing, what should you say?
Say that it's, depending on the test, just say it's the client's decision, not mine. I mean, if the child wants the parent in the room, that's fine, but if they don't want you, then you're not allowed in here.
Okay, I like that answer. There's more to it.
Legally, I believe parent gets final say, correct?
Mhm.
So it's like, well, children can't consent, and so you consent for the child. So ultimately, parent gets final say.
Okay, you're both wrong.
Really?
Yeah.
I would say something along the lines of, like, if it seems like it's going to be a distraction, if it's going to interrupt the quality of the assessment, then unfortunately, we're not gonna be able to have anyone or anything in here that could disrupt the assessment taking place.
You're close. It's close. Who else?
Is there something along the lines of like the actual, like, the assessment itself and like the sanctity of protecting like what's in the assessment?
Yeah. So, yes, if a parent comes in like, I want to be in there, I want to know what you're doing, you can say, sure, but it breaks standardization. So your results become invalid. So you're welcome to sit in the corner, but the whole test will be invalid. Okay? And usually they're like, never mind.
Yeah.
So legally, sure, they can come in. Why not? That's your right. But because the tests are standardized to be one-to-one in a quiet location, if they insist on being in the room, it invalidates your test. Because you don't know if parents are giving cues,
Yeah.
if they're giving them answers, or they're saying like, no, that's not it. Or, that's not it.
You can just straight up tell them, it's like, you can be in here, but it'll be a huge waste of time.
Here's the time.
We're gonna
And
have
honest
to-
results.
And your money.
Yeah. It unstandardizes your test. So sure you could be in here, but these results won't be valid. So come on in.
And then I remember you saying that they can only take a certain test so much at a certain time.
Yes.
So even that invalid one.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So if I'm gonna administer it while you're here, then you gotta wait another year before you can administer the exact
Yeah,
test.
that's
So not only have you wasted 2 hours of
Yeah,
your life.
now a year later.
But wasted 2 years
Yeah.
of your mental health.
Yes. So we really do not allow parents, except for this one test that allows it, and that's the ADOS, which is an autism measure, because there's one component regarding familial interactions. That is the only test. Everything else is like you and the child, you and the client, no one else in the room. And so it's not allowed. Of course, if they insist, sure, it just invalidates your results and you just wasted all this time. Come on in. Your choice.
Do you still write up a report for that?
I do, and then I document how many insisted being in the room, these results may be considered invalid, and then submit it.
Does that happen often?
No, because how many usually like, okay, never mind, no, I'll sit in the corner. Yeah.
Did the ones that not, did they get angry at you
They
after?
did.
And then were you like, well?
I told you, I documented, I told you,
So
so
what did you expect me to do? I told you this is exactly what would happen. This is your decision.
yeah.
So you still write that 20 and 30 page report
Mhm.
just to say,
Doesn't
this
matter.
doesn't mean anything?
Yep.
Oh, it's so
And it makes me mad too, you waste all this time too, on your end, you're wasting time writing a report, they wasted their time, it's just a whole waste of
At
time.
least you're the one getting paid for it.
I mean,
Well, that was meant, insurance would still pay for that?
That's okay for it, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But just that.
Yes. So compromises, I sometimes will allow parents to be outside the door, like so they can be near their child. Or if it's a two-way mirror, I'll let them see from the other side of the mirror. Or see but not hear outside the mirror, so they can hear the questions. So there's a way to kind of get around it if they insist. If the child's excessively aggressive, so stabbing people, hurting people, things like that, then we'll have another examiner come in to help us facilitate, but not the parent. We're not having the parent strangle the kid and like make them comply.
It has to be a
during the
neutral
test.
party.
Exactly. And so if they insist, okay, cool, it just invalidates your results. You cool with that? No? Okay, sit down. So your mental exam is that. How'd you come in? What do you look like? How do you feel? Are you groomed, well cleaned, things like that?
I'm also guessing that there are conditions in the mental status exam which would cause you to immediately terminate the exam.
Yes. So that goes into your appearance and behavior. So the first thing I look at is your behavior. So if you're coming in slurring your words, if your eyes are bloodshot, if I feel like you stink, like you just took a big whiff of like, I don't know, weed with cocaine. Is that what I don't know.
Stinky
Just something, I don't know, whatever stinky is, meth. Then I could be like, hey, this is not good. Like, we need to reschedule, right? So that's the first thing I look at is your behavior, your overall appearance. If you look drugged out, we're not doing this. If you look intoxicated, we're not doing this. And so I will reschedule and say, come back later. And so that's the first part, is your observable appearance during the first part of the interview. I also look at your manner of speech. Are you slurring words? Are you yelling? Are you whispering your words? Are you using non-words and jargon? That matters too. Then I look at your emotional state. I look at both your affect and your mood. Your affect is your current feeling or state. How do you feel? Happy, I'm sad, I'm mad, angry, joyful. And then your mood is how long have you felt this way? It's the well-being of your client over a long period of time. So as an example, they may seem anxious and sad during your session because they're nervous, but they say overall that they have been depressed, right? So we have mood and we have affect. As another example, they may seem anxious and sad during the session, but report being joyful throughout the week, right? Two different questions to ask them. Overall, you want to make sure you ask them how they're feeling, and then you also look at, are they actually feeling this way? And then probing, do you often feel this way? How do you feel on a normal week? Tell me about your week in general. How do you feel? So both mood and affect are assessed as well during this time. I then look at your thought components. So cognition. Are you having any kind of delusion or hallucinations? Are you saying things are there but they're not there? Are you having disorganized speech and just kind of mumbling words and phrases? Yeah. Are you having kind of obsessions like, I gotta check my car keys, I need to lock my door, I need to lock my car, I need to go home, my dog is outside, and you're just overly worried about just general things. Any kind of homicidal ideation. And then I also look at any kind of flight of ideas. What is flight of ideas?
Just kind of non-connected, fast racing thoughts.
Yeah, just thoughts in general. Yeah, not connected, just random thoughts coming out of their mouth. That's flight of ideas. I also look at your any kind of logical thinking. If you're coming in very logical, I look at your organizational skills. Are you coming in prepared? Do you have documents in hand? Do you know where to go? And then any kind of tangentiality. So again, are you aware we're here? Are you aware that we're in session? Do you know who you are? What day it is? What time it is? Just basic, realistic expectations. Well, then that plays into cognition. So, do you know where you are? Who am I? Who are you? What time it is? Do you know why you're here today? Why you're being assessed? I quickly look at how is your memory. So I may say things like, what did you do this morning? What did you have for breakfast? What did you have for breakfast yesterday? Oh, you didn't have breakfast? Why not? And kind of probe the memory skills. I might say things like, what time did you wake up this morning? Or what time did you wake up yesterday? What time did you go to bed yesterday? Kind of probing just long-term memory to see like if they're intact. I also look at overall insight on their ability to make judgments. Are you able to make decisions right now? You're not intoxicated or under the influence. So for your mental status exam, when you write your report for this class, your mental status exam is going to be very short and sweet because you're dealing with people you know, right? So really, you're going to put like very simple information like came appropriately dressed, they were groomed, appeared aware, arrived on time, and appeared to be alert, right? Pretty simple. In the real world, these are probably about 2 paragraphs long of just documentation of their appearance, their mood, their affect, and just cognitions.
Would this be something that you write fairly quickly after the initial assessment?
Yeah, very quick.
Well, it's still hot.
Well, so hot, yeah.
Okay.
Usually demographics and mental status is like the first thing you write. Then your assessment results come next. So what did you administer? You're listing them in the order you used them. So if you first did observations and interview, and that flows into the report. Observations and interviews. If you first did a intake, that's the next thing in your report. Think of it as like your table of contents. It kind of flows by page number. Everything just kind of flows together. It's not out of order, you have to find out which one goes where. So everything kind of just goes together. You also make sure you list out the assessments you gave them in log format. So you're spelling out all the tests you gave them, no acronyms. So instead of saying Tony 4, you would say Test of Nonverbal Intelligence 4th edition. And instead of saying BASC 3, you would say Behavior Assessment System for Children 3rd edition. You spell it out the first time. And then never ever, never ever, never ever ever give out raw scores. Why don't you give out raw scores? Why not?
Because they can't do anything with them?
Can't do anything. It's not standardized. They mean nothing.
Yeah.
They're nothing. Raw scores are tied to age and grade equivalent scores, which are also bullcrap. They mean nothing. Raw scores are not standardized and not comparable to anything. what happens a lot is families like these. They like the Ross scores, they like the age and grade equivalencies because it's an easy number to understand. So families like it because we can say, oh, your child's functioning at a 4-year-old, 2-month level. And they're like, that makes sense. I like that. Not knowing it's tied only to raw scores. And that's it, number correct versus incorrect. There's no standardization, there's no sample, there's nothing. And so those results are not very valid. Now if you ask me, do we use those, do actually people use those outside in the real world? Do clinicians report those in reports? Yeah. And then I had a little bit of conversation to say, hey family, this means nothing. As an example, standard scores, which we'll cover next week, have a range. And an average standard score is 85, okay? Stick with me. If I told a family their child had an 85, so right in the average range, but the grade equivalency to that score is significantly lower because it's based on raw scores, that family's gonna be like, you're telling me it's average, but they're functioning at this level, and now it gets confusing. How do you tell them that's not accurate because we're hearing that they're low functioning without looking at the standardization score? And so just leave it out, because if you can't explain it away or you can't convince them not to look at it, why would you report it in the first place? So just don't put it in there. If they ask for it, you'll say, sorry, it's not a very valid score, we stick to this kind of score. And just leave it at that. It's not your job to appease the people that you work with, because those scores are not very valid. So stay away from raw scores. Alright? Cool. Make sure your scores are easy to understand. So percentiles and percentile ranks are also very confusing because you want to make sure you present them appropriately. So next week when you do your readings over chapters 5, 6, and 7, I believe, review how they kind of format the percentiles and what they mean. And then when we go over them in a lecture, I'll show you how to present them in a way that makes sense to families, because it gets kind of confusing. Again, you're trying to break down these very complex stat numbers into a very basic language, which is hard to do. Make it understandable, easy to read. People can pick it up and know what you're reading, what you did, and why. Make sure you're unbiased in your language. You're not biased in your writing. And again, making sure you be as concise as possible and making sure you're covering all items related to your presenting problem. So if my assessment was over anxiety, my report should reflect that of anxiety. My recommendations report anxiety, diagnosis anxiety. It's consistent across the board.
Plug it during the assessment, you find something that's not related to the initial reason for them coming in, but you find to be more concerning.
I assess more, get more questions,
Okay.
more tests. It's very rare that it's just a one diagnosis shot. It's also very rare that they're accurate. So sometimes they think it's anxiety and it's not. Or something that's that plus something else. It's never a quick you got it, on the money. Very rarely. Most of the time you find other stuff. Very common.
In your work, do you occasionally get people who come back for, say, diagnoses that have been in remission for a while, but it's just been a really stressful time and it's come back then?
Yeah. We'll reevaluate.
Okay.
You make your diagnoses using the DSM-5-TR. Based again on the whole assessment, not just one test score. You can add medical and psychosocial or environmental conditions using the ICD codes if you want. Not required, but if you want to add them, you can. As an example.
Are those codes more for making the higher ups
Yes.
just able to code it better?
Yes. As an example, the DSM-5 code would be like 296.22, and parentheses the code from the book, and you would have the disorder, whether it's the condition it's under, single episode, and then the severity, which would be moderate, or like rule out, which again is very confusing. When you see rule out, what does that mean again?
Could be used.
But
Could be, we don't know. but.
There's not enough information.
We need to rule this out, right? It does not mean we ruled out this. It means we need to rule it out. And so sometimes when we get confused, because this looks like you ruled out adjustment disorder. What it means is you don't have enough to rule it out. You need to rule it out in the future. A V code examples is you could put problems related to employment or relationship distress with spouse. And a Z code is displacement of cervical and vertebrae disc chronic back pain, if they have that condition.
So B codes are environmental problems, Z codes are purely medical problems.
You will know the conditions if you have access to those records, which you should if you have a good documentation flow. So if you request all the records, you should be able to figure out medical codes and any kind of environmental stressors. For the most part, most clinicians don't really incorporate these unless it's related to the overall diagnoses. Most of the time they stick to DSM-5 code and they call it good. It's optional, not required.
Is it appreciated when there's a lot more context, or does it actually get to be a little too much sometimes?
Sometimes too much, yeah. And they don't really care about it as much. It doesn't really matter because it's all kind of situational sometimes. So it's kind of like, okay, thanks for all these codes. Your summary and conclusions is you putting all the information together to write your summary and your conclusions. And often this section is the only section read by people, and I hate that, but most people like to skip to the very end and just read your summary. It's a very common practice. So if your summary is crappy, that's all they read. And so make sure your summary is very, very long, and you're summarizing all your results at the very end, because some people only read that. It has to be accurate. Do not leave out any main points, and be very succinct. Keep it very professional, concise, and hitting the main points. That's your summary. Do not add new information into your summary. As an example, the report from Monday that I reviewed, they had said that they are going to be looking at ADHD. It was ADHD throughout the report, blah, 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 blah. At the very end of the report, they said, oh, by the way, this child also has dyslexia. No academic measures, there was no reading measures, there was one spelling measure, and that was all. Never mentioned in the report, never mentioned in the referral question, I just threw it in there at the end. Don't do that.
Would a better reason for that be like recommend additional
Yes,
assessment
recommendations,
due
yes.
to
That's
problems,
more appropriate.
like due to problems that occur during the
Exactly.
assessment.
Recommend to be assessed for dyslexia would be appropriate, and having a language just thrown in there. Yes. So don't do that, but just add new information just because you feel like it. Don't do that. Or if you just feel like it and you're like, I'm just gonna razzle dazzle at the end and put like, you know, I'm gonna add in some random information I just find important, I just thought of, don't do that. If you use it in the report, your summary is a reflection of your overall report, not just you adding new information. They can make inferences, but again, try and make it very factual, very legally defensible reports. So it's not misinterpreted in any way, to the maximum extent possible. Sometimes it's hard to do because again, these are tests. And so sometimes people misinterpret it, but as long as you write it in a way that's legally defensible, you're fine. And then have recommendations that address also the strengths of the client. Sometimes these meetings, these debriefings are very negative, and families and clients hear all the bad things that they're bad at. So bad at math, you're bad at reading, you're bad at social emotional, you're terrible adaptives, you have awful memory, and they're like, God, what are you good at? And so I always tell people, give them some strengths. Even if it's like the bare minimum strengths, like if everything is a weakness, and I mean everything, you can say things like, is timely, has great parental support, has ability to make others laugh. Those are strengths, and highlight those in your report as well, because it's not just a negative interaction. And sometimes I leave the session thinking like, what am I good at? This sucks, I'm awful. You know, they just feel defeated. So putting a couple of strengths is important in your overall summary. And the recommendations in the last section, your recommendations will be based on your information on what you gathered and what you feel will benefit the client. When you generate the reports online, they give you recommendations, and I'll show you some in a second. You can pick and choose some of those, as long as you're adding more based on what you saw, and based on what you feel needs to be addressed in the future. So like I said, looking at dyslexia in the future, bullying on dyslexia, let's take a recommendation. Or further assessments to address potentially looking at ADHD. Good recommendation. Recommending further evaluations is okay as well if you don't have enough information to give you a diagnosis. Address it specific to your client. Some people like to write these in a paragraph format. Some people like bullet format. Some people like numbered format. It does not matter. Whatever you choose to do, just do it and stay consistent.
Is there any preference on the client side?
No.
Okay.
You're like you. What I don't want you to do is this. At the very end of your report, you have your summary, and then some random loose paper says recommendations and has a graphic on it, and it's from online. And you're like, here you go. Here's your recommendations. Meaning you went to Google, you asked Google or AI to generate all those recommendations, and you printed it off and you said, here you go. Not good practice. Your recommendations should be tied to your results at the end of your report, not just a loose paper just floating in space somewhere. Not okay. And that happened last week. Don't do that.
This is a bad week.
How
I
is
know.
this person employed?
They're well connected, well liked. And then at the end goes your signature that you have vouched for it, saying, I'm good, this is good, here's my signature of approval, here you go, and let's talk about our report. Alright. That's it for the lecture part. Now we're gonna write reports, but before we do that, let's take a 5-minute break.